The densest city on Earth. This is a video that I've seen already, but I think it's a great sort of encapsulation of everything that I've researched about the walled city, and it's one of my favorite videos on the subject, and so I'm posting it to share it with you guys.
What you are looking at is considered the most densely populated place that ever existed. On an area of just 6.5 acres, or 4 football fields, dozens of individual buildings have merged into one solid organism that houses shops, restaurants, churches, private homes, and virtually everything that makes a city.
Non-stop noise. I already hate crowds so much. I would get so sick of being anywhere near the interior of this place very quickly, I'm sure.
While the outside-facing apartments get to enjoy sunlight, a vast majority are located within this block, full of dark pathways. It is a giant urban maze that attracted all kinds of people with reasons to hide. This is Kowloon Walled City.
I also really like how this channel got a 3D like rendering, and I mean, it's of course not perfect. You can see some areas that are a bit rough around the edges, but they got like a 3D model of the whole city and then placed it among like a reflective surface, so you can kind of see like the mass that it was without just looking at the realistic pictures of it. Because if you look at like the photos of Kowloon Walled City, you'll see that like the only real pictures that you have are like pictures that show the very front of it or that show the very top. And of course some of these are also just guesstimated photos because this thing was torn down, I believe, in the 90s. Like this was a photo that was taken in 1990, but seeing it as like an actual 3D model that you can look at like in this video here, I think is a really, really good way of putting it in your mind's eye. By the way, this creator, Neo, does a very, very good job summarizing a lot of very, very high information content. If that's something that interests you, definitely subscribe to their channel. Of course, with every video that I do a reaction to and post a video of, the original video will be linked down below. I highly, highly, highly encourage each and everyone watching this video to go click that link and leave a like on their video as well, because this should be a symbiotic relationship here.
To understand just how incredibly closely packed people lived here, let's compare this city with other places. Take the East Village in New York City, located in Lower Manhattan. There's a small park in the center, but other than that, it is a pretty dense neighborhood with historic row houses and more recent large apartment buildings.
I knew someone who lived in this area of New York City, yeah, it's pretty densely packed, though I only visited them once, and that was over a decade ago. I bet it's more dense now.
Based on the 2010 US Census, just over 44,000 people live here. That results in a population density significantly higher than for all of New York City, and New York is the most densely populated city in the United States. By all means, this is a dense place. But let's compare it to Kowloon Walled City.
Look at the difference here. Just look at that. Keep it in here. Keep it in your noggin, okay? Listen to this.
In 1987, a survey estimated that 33,000 people live here.
That is ridiculous. The lack of individualism in a place like this is absurd. This is a community of people that is acting as one hive. And in a lot of ways they thrived. But the risks and the issues that this place also had on top of it is insane. And there's another video that I'd like to share with you guys, but I probably won't react to it. But I'll also leave that linked below, and it shows how the Salvation Army ended up establishing some schools within the walled city before it was torn down. Very, very interesting watch, and I highly recommend you watch that one too.
The density is simply astounding. And in reality, the number might have been even bigger, with some estimates going up to 50,000 people.
There's no census for this place.
Perhaps the strangest thing about Kowloon Walled City, however, is just how abruptly it ends. While everything is crammed into this tight block of buildings, behind the sharp walls of the city, there are relatively spaced out buildings, and even a park with sports fields. So why was everything crammed into this small block?
Territory?
The answer is that Kowloon Walled City wasn't part of the rest of Hong Kong, but had its own legal status. The Walled
This is how it started.
City began
And the walled city is an old name. It doesn't even have walls at this point. Like when it got to its later stages, they built outside of the walls, and it was the only walled part of the walled city was the walls of the apartment buildings that made it seem like a big wall. So the name seemed still relatively appropriate, but the walled city got its name from there being large walls built around the city. Eventually that wasn't the case.
as nothing more than a small Chinese military outpost, stationing about 10 guards. It really started to take shape more than a century later, when the outpost was expanded by the construction of a larger fort. At the same time, the nearby harbor of Canton began to gain importance. Chinese tea was a hot commodity for British traders, who purchased it in staggering volumes, allowing this region to prosper. However, the trade relationship was notably unbalanced. While the British bought large quantities of tea, the Chinese had little need for goods from Europe. To improve this trade balance, the British began to illegally import opium from India to China.
I'm sorry, I forgot about this. It's just like, oh yeah, we're buying too much cheaper. Let's just send them a bunch of drugs and see what happens. The result? Kowloon Walled City!
This scheme proved effective, with the widespread consumption of the drug escalating rapidly.
That was done in horrible faith, though. Like, let's be honest. I mean, even back in the early days, we knew that opium was like a hook on you drug. It was something that would, once you start consuming opium as an analgesic, you are basically going to rely on it for your basic function. So yeah, that was done on purpose. That specifically choosing that type of trade, 100%.
This led to an addiction epidemic, which wreaked havoc on the Chinese economy. Recognizing this crisis, the imperial government took decisive action to halt the opium trade, but this move led to a heated conflict, which would later be known as the First Opium War between Great Britain and the Chinese Empire.
I personally haven't done as much research onto this aspect of the development of the Kowloon Walled City. I don't know much about the Opium War, and I don't know much about the circumstances surrounding it. So I will not be commenting that much on this part of the video, as I don't have much expertise. I would recommend, if you guys are interested in this, that you do your own research on the subject.
Britain won the war and subsequently occupied Hong Kong in 1841. The walled city was not affected, as it was located on the island nearby, and as a result of this loss, the Chinese Empire decided to reinforce the fort in Kowloon by building large walls around it.
There's
giving
the name.
area its lasting name, Kowloon Walled City. At the heart of this fortress, they built a yamen, which is the main office from which this outpost is administered. The tensions between China and Britain continued on, ultimately leading to the Second Opium War in 1860. As a result, the Kowloon Peninsula too fell into British hands, and the final boundary negotiation took place in 1898, resulting in a 99-year lease of the new territories to Britain.
Wow.
This is, in short, the story of how Hong Kong became a British colony as it is commonly known. But what is often overlooked is that the convention included one specific exception: the Kowloon Walled City, which is located inside the new territories, a Chinese enclave in the middle of British Hong Kong. As time moved on, both the Chinese and the British administrations showed a lack of interest in the walled city, leaving it to its own fate. The desolate barracks soon became makeshift homes for squatters seeking refuge. and recognizing the need for community structures, a Protestant church seized the opportunity to establish a senior home within the historic Yamen.
Could you imagine moving into one of these like senior homes as an old like Chinese person? And then after that happens, it turns, let's say you move into something like this and it's like, hey, this is a city. It's part of it's part of mainland China. So you don't have to apply for British citizenship. You're an older individual, so that might not be worthwhile to you. Let's move you in here. You will be cared for. And then the area around you turns into this. Like, that's ridiculous. Like, that's the amount of inconvenience that some of the early adopters of migration into this city, like that's unfortunate for those people, I'm sure. How rapidly this developed too.
But the peaceful existence of this enclave was shattered in 1937 when war erupted between Japan and China. The full-scale invasion initiated by Japan emerged as the central conflict in the Pacific throughout World War II. And by 1942, Japan had taken control of vast swaths of northern China, as well as holding various coastal exclaves, one of them being Hong Kong, which they utilized as a strategic military base. The Japanese expanded the local Kai-tak airport, and to do so they needed building materials. Therefore, they tore down the walls of Kowloon Walled City, which was located right near the airport. The end of the Second World War saw Hong Kong revert to British control. Simultaneously, the newly founded People's Republic of China in 1949 reasserted its right over the Kowloon Walled City.
Went back to the way it was.
However, neither the Chinese nor the British took control of this area. And with a massive wave of refugees in the wake of the Chinese Civil War, the need for cheap living space in Hong Kong was immense.
Absolute perfect storm of just clustering a large amount of people into a small space.
And so, in the decades that followed, a maze of buildings grew ever higher and denser. Single houses became multi-story buildings, became 14-story skyscrapers. The sunlit streets turned into shaded paths until they were eventually completely blocked from sight.
And let's just think about this too. This is an actual miracle that this was able to even stay standing until the 90s, the 1990s. Because if you think about it, there were no regulations whatsoever for any of these buildings, and they stretched almost as tall as some of the more modern surrounding buildings of Hong Kong. That's the fact that this whole thing didn't even go up in flames or come crashing down or anything is unbelievable and kind of miraculous, in my opinion.
Sunlight. Within the confines of the walled city, the laws of Hong Kong were not enforced. Any construction within the city proceeded without adhering to any building codes, with one singular exception. Due to the city's close proximity to Kai-tak Airport, a strict height limit of 14 stories was enforced. Kowloon Walled City was located right along the path into the airport. Landings at Kai-tak were one of a kind, with pilots navigating through Hong Kong's mountainous terrain, flying remarkably close to the walled city on final approach. The highest priced apartments were those facing the outside, followed by those near the internal courtyard. These units offered the precious commodity of sunlight and fresh air, and you could add a caged balcony to your apartment, cleverly expanding your living space. But most of the units were located inside, in extremely unhealthy conditions. This is a plan for a typical building inside the city.
Wow.
With no windows, people here were completely
340 square feet for the equivalent of $40,000. in an area like that where you have like your commode and kitchen in one area. Ay, ay, ay. That is dense.
Dependent on electric light. There also was no waste management in place, which led to catastrophic air quality. Frequently, rubbish was simply disposed on one of the city's rooftops, or thrown into one of the shafts between buildings.
In some of the other videos I had watched on this subject, I had heard from a couple of people that said that they had had parents or grandparents who had lived within the walled city at one point said that you could basically smell it from a mile away. It doesn't I think that's a shocker to basically nobody here.
The air is said to have been constantly stuffy and polluted by the many factories that operated inside the city. As for clean water, a mere 6 official water stations served the entire city, which means residents often had to carry the water over long distances. In terms of electricity, few actually paid for the service.
And most of it was
Instead,
stolen.
most residents opted to illegally tap into external cables, routing them through the city's intricate maze of narrow passageways. These harsh living conditions attracted not just those looking for a cheap place to live. The city's ambiguous legal status also attracted those who saw potential for unique business opportunities within its shadowy confines. The walled city became a popular hub for dentists. Many of those had obtained their qualifications in mainland China, but found their licenses unrecognized in British-governed Hong Kong. This rendered them unable to legally practice elsewhere in the city. The absence of regulatory oversight also allowed various workshops, such as those specializing in metal fabrication, to flourish within the city.
I would be really curious to know how many people had like dental operations done here. Like I have a filling in my back tooth over here that I'm gonna have to get redone soon. I'm dreading it because I'm pretty resistant to a lot of the pain medicine that they give you, and it always hurts whenever I get any like operations done on my teeth, which is unfortunate. Hopefully that changes this time. Hopefully they give me enough drugs. But I wonder what the tooth practices here were like for some of the dentists. And I wonder if there was any issues with like tooth infections because those can be lethal very quickly. Like I had heard about a kid who neglected to get a cavity filled and he ended up getting sepsis from letting it become an abscess. Luckily he survived, but he got very close to death. And there have been many of other people who have died from tooth infections just because of how quickly it can become septic. I wonder if any of that was an issue here or an epidemic. Could be. Certainly possible with these licenses. And I know that mainland China at this time probably didn't have as high of a safety standard for medicine as a place like British Hong Kong or the UK, but I wouldn't know. China around this time was a little bit more secretive with their internal operations, and obviously the internet didn't exist, so that information traveled slowly if it traveled at all.
And kitchens were selling popular food items that were outlawed in the rest of Hong Kong, such as dog meat. Generally, food production was a common business inside the city, despite the completely unsanitary conditions. It is even said that many of the delicacies processed here over the day ended up on the plates of expensive restaurants across Hong Kong later in the night. While these kinds of businesses within the walled city skirted the edge of legality, others plunged straight into the realms of serious criminal activity. Just because this city is free from the laws of Hong Kong did not mean it was a space without order. Power structures still exist, with the triads, notorious criminal gangs, controlling the city. While businesses did not pay taxes, many of them were forced to pay protection money to these groups. And the triads themselves engaged in illegal businesses, such as soliciting prostitution, opium dens, and in the later years venturing into heroin trafficking. The Hong Kong authorities found themselves in a difficult position, not wanting to let the growing addiction problem get out of hand.
This is a fundamental problem with true anarchy. Once you have a place that is actually in a true state of anarchy where there is no laws being enforced by a higher power, you're going to have people that are willing to go down to the depravity of humankind, basically because of their ability to stomach going down to that level of depravity. They can gain power very, very, very quickly out of intimidation or out of I mean, I don't know, just sheer groups of these like-minded individuals coming together, and then via intimidation. That's probably how the triads ended up getting established. They dealt with drugs, they dealt with um, trafficking, they dealt with um, I mean, they basically established an illegal hierarchy within the city, and they forced the residents of the city to pay them protection money. And that protection money is like, oh, we'll protect you from us. As you're paying them protection money to protect yourself from getting beaten up by them or killed. In this case, probably killed. Because I mean, what's Hong Kong gonna do? They don't have any control over the area, and China's completely ignoring it. Like, yeah, I live in here was bad.
Police presence inside the city would be an affront to China, which still claims the territory as its own. Therefore, in the mid-1970s, the authorities decided to carry out many isolated raids, with police officers storming the city for short periods of time, arresting criminals, confiscating drugs, and then leaving again. In addition, various private aid organizations established themselves, operating a kindergarten as well as a Christian missionary youth center
That was the Salvation Army.
that offers help with addiction. The historic Yamen in the middle of the city became a popular social spot, hosting public events for the city's residents. Even though the situation in the city improved in parts, it was again geopolitical reasons that ultimately ushered in the final chapter of the city. Its legal status was a result of the 99-year lease of the surrounding new territories, and it is precisely that countdown that was coming to an end. In 1984, after years of negotiations, Great Britain and China agreed on a handover of all of Hong Kong back to China. This handover was scheduled to take place in 1997, but the breakthrough in negotiations also cleared up the dispute regarding Kowloon Walled City. Despite massive resistance from the city's residents, the two governments jointly decided that the social situation, the risk of fire breaking out, as well as the fear of any of the buildings collapsing, would justify the complete evacuation and demolition of the city. With the start of the demolition in 1993, Kowloon Walled City came to an end.
I've heard that like the turnaround period for that was like less than a few days. Like, wasn't it like at the beginning of the week, people had heard like rumors that they were going to start tearing down the city. And then there were police that would come in, and this was like 2 days before it got torn down, ushered everybody out that they possibly could, tried to warn everybody that if you're in the buildings, it's going to get torn down with you in it. And then after 2 days, they just started ripping everything down. It was like that. It was just immediate.
The city fades into memory. Two diametrically opposed ideas of its existence emerge. The dystopian image of the city inspired a large number of fictional depictions in film and art, often showcasing Kowloon Walled City as a futuristic hotbed of crime and corruption. As such, the city inspired tons of dystopian fantasies. However, what gets lost here is that this city was also a vibrant, tightly knit community. As chaotic as the city may appear from the outside, there was actually a lot of order. And the notion of complete chaos is simply wrong. You could send a letter to someone living inside the city, and despite the apparent chaos, it would get delivered just fine.
Yeah.
People came here with nothing. They then raised children.
I mean, it was mostly people in the same boat. I mean, aside from the extreme gang hierarchies that would take place in a place like this, it really seems like the place was just inhabited by a large amount of people in the same situation. You know, you couldn't get your citizenship in British Hong Kong, but you're in the area, you're in the land, and because of the Chinese Civil War, you lost your home. It was just a lot of people who had very little or had nothing or struggled to make ends meet. And so they went to the walled city to try to, you know, at least establish some kind of semblance of a life. And I feel like there was a bit of a companionship between those people, and I feel like everyone kind of understood that.
Established businesses, and then had to self-organize those aspects of city life that the lack of government had left out. To many, Kowloon Walled City is a symbol of Hong Kong, showing that hard-working people were able to create community even despite harsh conditions. Today, on the side of the walled city, there is a park where remains of the historical city can be found in several places, such as the historic Yamen building still standing, as well as a small model remembering the urban monolith that once stood here. It's easy to vilify, and it's just as easy to romanticize a place like this. Ultimately, the answer might lie somewhere in the middle. The story of Kowloon Walled City is one I've been meaning to tell for a long time, because it's a story that explores the intersections of architecture, history, and culture. Looking at changes of urban places throughout the decades, I think, can be incredibly insightful to understand.
This is literally the physical embodiment of if there is a will, there is a way. Because this was all people who had very little and were here out of necessity, and look what they were able to achieve. Sure, it had tons of problems, but is it not just impressive that such a place like this could have even existed? Food for thought.
One of my favorite videos I did that explores exactly these intersections is my video about the construction of the original Twin Towers, in which I explain how these buildings completely changed how skyscrapers are built. This video is part of my ongoing video series Underexposure, which also features videos about the raid on Bin Laden's compound in 2000.
Those videos are very close to each other. I'm going to guess that this covers some heavy material. Really, really cool video. Subscribe to Neo and like the original video if you enjoyed this one. I got to go take a piss, and then we'll play some video games.